So good morning, guys. It is Sunday morning, about 5:30 a.m. I'm in here in one of my breeding lofts. These guys are all Portviets. And part of the reason we're in this loft, I wanted to kind of do another video that was kind of talking about two different polar opposites. In one of the last videos I talked about open lofts versus individual breeding coops, and that was a pretty popular video. It actually had some of the highest amount of views I've ever seen. So I kind of wanted to do something a little bit similar today. I kind of put my finger there in front of the camera. Sorry about that. And I wanted to talk about inbreeding versus outcrossing. Now, in pigeon racing, there are two very, very distinct camps of ideas on how to breed and select your pigeons as far as your breeding styles. There's one camp that are basically very, very pro outcrossing, and the other camp is pretty much very pro inbreeding. And you'll actually find a pretty wide gap on people's opinions on this. You'll find some really good flyers, especially among the Europeans, that they do a lot of outcrossing. That's really all they do. That's you find a lot of them, they don't inbreed at all. And on the other side, you also find a lot of people who are pretty much almost strictly inbreeders. And then you kind of also have some guys that are kind of in the middle, that they inbreed for stock, but they outcross for racers. And as some of you know, I've got a little bit of a fairly unique background as a breeder, in that my family have been breeding animals for competitive purposes for almost 300 years. Pretty much you name it, we've done it. Exhibition canaries, rabbits, exhibition dogs, exhibition poultry, utility poultry, competition poultry, obviously the pigeons, lots and lots of different animals, large livestock for exhibition and performance as well, utility performance like dairy. And we've been very, very fortunate to be very successful at it for three centuries now. And needless to say, in having that background, you come into a situation when you're raised around something like that you pay a lot more attention to it than the average person. A lot of people, especially in pigeons, they go about breeding very, very haphazardly, and they don't really understand kind of even basic terminology sometimes. You've got kind of a lot of people have some funny ideas on what inbreeding is and what constitutes line breeding and so on and so forth. And there's definitely in the pigeon sport, definitely a lack of understanding is, I guess, the best way to look at it. But I'm not going to really get into the milieu of the different types of matings and what their purposes are and why they're used and what effect they have. We'll save that for another subject. But what I do want to talk about is the kind of the advantages and disadvantages of the outbreeding systems and the inbreeding systems. Now, one camp is very, very much for the outcross for a number of wide reasons. A lot of them believe that there is automatically, when you outcross two lines, that you get hybrid vigor. And basically what creates hybrid vigor is what we call in genetic circles overdominance. Is what's responsible for hybrid vigor. And basically, when you have true hybrid vigor, basically what you get is you actually get genetic gains beyond both lines that are crossed. And I'm here to tell you that contrary to what most people think, hybrid vigor is not automatic. Like I said, it is a result. It's commonly believed that that is a result of overdominance, which we'll probably talk about that concept in the future. But when you have overdominance, you have a significant genetic gain over each parental line appears in the F1 offspring. And that is actually pretty rare. The poultry industry, in particular, has used a lot of hybridization in the development of basically utility poultry, especially in the broiler industry and the egg industry. And even though those hybrids, like the Cornish cross chicken, or the Austria white, or the California white, Novagen, various so-called breeds or varieties, as a lot of people think of them, which are all F1 hybrids. For every successful one, there are actually many failures. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that about outbreeding. Now, on the plus side, when you outcross, you are basically creating heterogeneity, which basically means that you have a lot of variation among the offspring in their genetics. Now, in doing so, you tend to not get what they call deleterious alleles come together. And deleterious alleles are basically genetic traits that are negatives, for lack of a better explanation. That's the simple term. Is that they're negative genes. We would consider a deleterious allele to be a fault. You know, we could say it's a failure to thrive is a common one that is often cited. You don't tend to get those without breeding. What you do is you get a lot of variation. And as a result, most of the health of the birds is fairly sound. You know, you don't tend to get weakness, you know, that's created by genetics. You don't tend to get deformities that are caused for genetic reasons. You may get some that are environmental, you know, as a result of nutrition or environmental contamination, you know, which we do have everywhere. You know, a lot of people, they have bad water, they have bad soil, you can get bad feed. Those things are environmental factors. They can certainly cause things like that. Nutritional deficiencies can cause them. Poor health can cause them. But as a rule, provided you're taking care of your pigeons when you outcross your birds, generally you get fairly decent vigor, even if it is not actually hybrid, you know, true hybrid vigor result, you know, that creates significant gains. Even though you don't necessarily get that when you outcross, the birds are at least, you know, healthy and standardized. And that's one advantage. Now, the disadvantage of doing the outcross is that because of the variation, you have no uniformity of anything, regardless of how you select it. Even if you select, let's say, two birds that are short distance pigeons and they're race winners, if they're unrelated, just because you made them together, you're not necessarily going to get that because you don't really know what is behind those birds. They have all kinds of different genes. Obviously, genetics of pigeons, especially racing pigeons, are very complex. We understand a few genes to date. We understand genes like LDH and Cry1 and CASC and genes like that. We have a basic understanding of those and know that there is a benefit to them. But other than that, we don't know a lot. There's still probably many thousands of genes out there we don't know about them yet, and we don't know what role they play. So needless to say, there's a lot there's a lot goes into one pigeon. Now, by stark contrast, when you inbreed pigeons, you are creating a homogeneous line. That basically means that the pigeons, most of your birds are receiving the same genes, for better or for worse. These Port-Vliet birds are actually very, very uniform, like the checkers. They are very, very similar in type. They handle very similarly. This is a inbred line at this point. Even though Jacob Port-Vliet himself, he's actually not a heavy inbreeder, but the birds, since they've been here in the U.S., they have become inbred, and they're very, very uniform. And not only are they uniform in type, when I pick these birds up and handle them, they actually all act the same in the hand. I've noticed when you pick these Port-Vliet birds up, and you get them in your hand to examine them and handle them, they actually all have a tendency of folding their wings up over top of your thumb when you try to, hold the wings down. And every single one of them do it. It's basically a genetic behavior. And that is an example of the sort of traits that you start to create in a fixed form. And a really big advantage of having an actual bloodline, which a lot of people don't have. They have what they call their bloodline, but they don't have uniform traits. They have pigeons of many different colors and many different types and various performance and things like that. And they have different temperaments and all that. And one of the disadvantages of doing that without breeding is obviously when you go to fly them and train them and manage them, they all act very differently. And it can be kind of difficult. You are putting yourself at a disadvantage when you have a lot of pigeons that are not uniform in their temperament and their type. Some of them may react well to a training regime or a feeding regime, but then you find that some of the others do not. And a lot of that is a result of the fact that they don't have uniform traits. Instead they have a very mixed bag of genetics, and they kind of come out every which way, regardless of how you select them, simply because you're dealing with a lot of variation. Now, contrary to that, with an inbred family, you are, as the family is being developed and you're sticking to a closed line, you're actually fixing the traits. You're starting to get birds. They have the same type. They probably perform the same. They will handle the same or very similarly. They'll manage similarly. They will react to the same method, for the most part, similarly. And needless to say, if you're going forward, that is a major advantage going forward. I like what the late Hans Rotenbacher used to say. Hans Rotenbacher was a very famous roller flyer in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. I knew Hans very briefly in his late years. By that time, he was out of rovers. He was actually living in a nursing home in Colorado, and I used to occasionally call him. He was out of birds and all that because he was basically, kind of on his last legs, and he had a lot of problems. He was starting to have Alzheimer's. Sometimes I would call him, and he wouldn't remember me from the last time I talked to him, but he would, remember things from the 50s and even before that. But one of the things that really impressed me that he said was, he was talking about rover kits, and he said a kit of rovers is a family, and the best kits of rovers come from birds that are closely related to one another. So he realized that basically if you created a uniform family, that they tended to managed similarly and reacted the same way as each other to the same methods, you were bound to have more success that way. Versus outcrossed birds, which pretty much turn out every which way there is. Now the downside of inbreeding is that while we are selecting for the traits we want, and in theory, creating them in a homogeneous form, basically doubling those positive traits, it's like the old computer programmers used to say, garbage in, garbage out. That in addition to accentuating the positive traits, you're also accentuating whatever negative traits are in the birds too. And that is the one downside with inbreeding, and it's probably one of the reasons why some people, and it's certainly not everybody, like my friend Frank McLaughlin, he is definitely very much a pro outcross guy. He believes in cramming as many unrelated superstar pigeons into the pedigree as possible, and he believes that's the way to do it. And I think when you do it, you're probably going to get a higher result among the average bird. You're not going to be doubling negative traits and kind of automatically be creating birds that are automatically pretty much going to cull themselves out of the equation from the training basket, or in the nest because they're weak or something like that. But on the other side, obviously, if you have a very, very good pigeon or a very good pair of pigeons and you work strictly around those, you can, over the long term, really create a fantastic family of pigeons where the percentages of the best keep increasing and increasing and increasing with each generation, simply because they're becoming more and more uniform and have more of those positive traits. But the trick to it all, of course, is that you are going to get the negative traits along with the good, and you have to eliminate those negative traits. So if you're a believer in inbreeding, as I am, and there's certainly other guys out there who are well known that are believers in inbreeding. Joe Nemelka comes to mind. I was talking to Joe not that long ago, and he was talking about how much he loves flying inbred pigeons. He is really, really pro inbreeding and does not outcross strictly for the sake of outcrossing. He really has to, for him to outcross, he's really got to have a bird that's something special, that really offers something to the line for him to do it. He won't do it just because he thinks he should outcross. He is, for the most part, sticking to a lot of his own pigeons, apart from, birds he's bringing in to try to improve them. And there's certainly other people out there with the same mindset. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to make a choice. If you're an inbreeder, success may not come immediately. You may get some breed in the first few generations of very, very exceptional pigeon and do well, but you're kind of seeing it from the long-term view. It may take you 5 or 10 years to really reach your goals. And for a lot of people, they want instant gratification. They would rather, have some success this year, hopefully next year. And outcrossing for them tends to give, some good instant gratification, because you're not automatically taking a lot of pigeons immediately kind of out of the equation, because you're not doubling the deleterious alleles together. So kind of going forward, I don't want to sell you on one method or the other, but needless to say, they're both very different systems, and you kind of have to make a decision out of what you want. I think in the long term, if you're really going to, drive forward and try to reach, certain goals as far as how you want your pigeons to look, how you want them to act, how you want them to perform, how you want them to react to management, you're probably going to choose an inbreeding system to reach those goals. But at the same time, it's going to take you a while. And it's going to take you a while largely because, in addition to accentuating the positive traits that you do want, you're also going to be accentuating the negative traits. And obviously, in doing so, the remedy to getting the traits you want is you have to eliminate the traits you don't want. And that's going to take you some time. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to make a decision whether you want the instant gratification right now, or if you want maybe the long-term success 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 7 years from now, a few generations later. But that is it, guys. Just a little bit on that subject. I know it's a long video, but I mean, we really are just scratching the surface on those two different types of mating systems. And like I said, there's also the guys that really do, you know, that are kind of more in the middle, that they inbreed for stock, they outcross for racers, they hope for the hybrid vigor. But like I said earlier, with the hybrid vigor, or the heterosis, as it is known in genetic circles, it is unfortunately a rare thing. So needless to say, going forward, you know, consider those two systems in mind and what the advantages are. And I think the big thing is, I've mentioned before, you know, it's really about what your goals are. You know, are you happy with, you know, maybe some routine success year after year after year? And if that's the case, you can probably get there outcrossing. You know, there's plenty of good pigeons out there. If you made them together, regardless of how you made them together, if they've got good stuff in them, chances are you're going to get some pretty decent birds along the way. But if you're really interested in the long-term goal and maybe want to fly a little higher than everybody else, you're probably going to have to look at an inbreeding system and really learn your art that way, and really start to learn how certain inbred matings work, why we do them, and what the expectation of them are. And the biggest thing of all, calling to eliminate the traits you don't want. But that is it, guys. Thanks for watching. I know it's been long, but thanks for tuning in. Keep them flying out there, guys.